Hello, everyone. I am Bridgette Klein, Director of Marketing for Willery. As many of you know, we are an HR and payroll staffing and consulting firm, and our focus and dedication is empowering people through assisting them with helping their staff make sure that they have the right staff, and then also making sure they have the right policies, procedures, and technology. Today, I am joined with Dr. Melissa. She is a great friend of Willery. She is one of the original Disrupt HR Columbus speakers. Residing in Columbus, we just, in talking with John and everyone, we just love discussing with her. She has a fascinating path to psychology, and she really understands the full story of how people are having the conversations that they are. Dr. Melissa, will you share a bit more about yourself?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, thanks for trusting me with this airtime. I take that very seriously, especially in today's world. So, as a psychologist, I definitely spend probably a little bit each day thinking about and talking about anxiety and depression. And because of my own circuitous career path, I kind of sit at the nexus of mental health and people living with anxiety and depression and grief and trauma who are also executives and professionals. So my client base is very heavily skewed, I guess, toward CEOs and partners in law firms and presidents of companies. And I've got a hefty handful of HR professionals as well. So as you can imagine, in the last 30 days or so, I've been pretty busy. This shocking experience we're all navigating together that is always, or it's sort of ubiquitous, it's everywhere. It affects people personally and it's affecting people professionally in unprecedented ways. And so I have some thoughts, I guess, about ways to think about what's going on, kind of define the problem a little bit, and then also I could share some of the advice, tricks, tips, techniques. For me as a psychologist and a cognitive behavioral therapist, I very much use cognitive behavioral therapy language, so I can kind of explain what some of that is and share some of those things so that they're accessible to everybody. And so those were sort of my thoughts. And, I'm used to being able to speak at conferences about, and I feel like I have content expertise. It's a talk I've given maybe to thousands of people. And this is the first time I'm talking about some of these constructs in this way. So I actually wrote some thoughts down on a piece of paper, like right there. So if I lose my train of thought or if I forget where I was going with something, I ask for a little bit of grace from the folks watching because this is the first time I've done this.
Yeah, and I know we were talking a little bit before we started recording. I think that's what people need to remember is that this is all new, and giving people grace on it is imperative. You can't assume that employees are going to be as productive immediately. You can't assume that everything's going to have the right process and flow seamlessly, and just understanding that we're all dealing with this significant event. I know it's been talked about that this is such a shared experience. It's not just a small sharing an experience, it's global. Can you share how that impacts kind of our society at large?
Well, sure. I guess I'll start with saying this is the first time in my professional life that I am also living the thing that I'm providing services about. Most therapist types, we tend to have certain things we don't touch clinically. There's certain things that maybe are too close to home or something that's still personal, and you don't offer your services in that area because of transference and projection, to use some psychobabble terms. But this is my lived experience too. So I had many speaking engagements canceled and within 24 hours. So that was really hard because I love to do those things. My children are home for school too. All of the things that all my folks are grieving, I'm experiencing that too. So that's new. That's very new for me. So that we're in it together thing, I'm living and breathing it for sure. I think that 30 days from now, we'll maybe be having a different conversation because it's a moving target, but I definitely have some thoughts. And I'll start kind of on the fear side of things because I believe that's ground zero for a lot of this. It's certainly the conversation that I am having again and again and again with all of my folks. So if it's cool with you, we'll kind of start with a little bit of how I think about fear and ways that it's manifesting. Is that okay?
That is awesome. I think we hear fear and it's so important to understand it. So yeah, go right ahead.
Okay, so I want you to think about two kinds of fear, like imminent fear and distal fear. Okay, so imminent fear might be, I don't want to get hit by that car when I'm at this crosswalk, so I'm going to obey the traffic signals. So it's this like immediate perception of threat and an immediate change of behavior. Distal fear is more like off in the distance. So that's what that means, like sometime in the future. So a distal fear might be, I don't want to live in poverty in retirement, so I'm going to save now. Or I don't want to be unhealthy or get lung cancer, so I'm not going to smoke now. So guess what kind of fear is more powerful and motivating and sustaining? Imminent fear. So we have a biological mechanism that works that makes us change our behavior quickly to adjust to the threat. So for me as a psychologist, one thing that has been stunning is how completely and suddenly everybody changed their behavior. It is fascinating. And I think as behavioral scientists, I think we're going to be talking about this and writing about this for years to come. You know, when I went to the grocery store the other day, I was stunned at everyone moving to not be close to someone else, that everyone stood 6 feet apart in the checkout line. People were wearing masks. I mean, I am in the business of behavior change. I mean, most mental health professionals at some level are. And sometimes it is a never-ending siege to get somebody to change their behavior because something they're doing is contributing to their own unhappiness or destructive in their life. So for me, it's this fascinating, oh my gosh, everybody changed everything all at once. And it's because of imminent fear and threat. So what a powerful motivator. I mean, truly, it's been astounding. Here's the problem. It's supposed to be quick and it's supposed to stop. And what has happened is that the fear and the imminent threat is being recycled in our information and our data consumption with things packaged in cognitive distortions. So I want to talk a little bit about cognitive distortions, if that's cool. Is that okay to talk about those?
Absolutely.
Okay.
That was one of my questions. It's a term that sounds like, I think I know what it means, but what does it actually mean?
Sure, exactly. So a cognitive distortion is like a thinking error. So that's another way of thinking about cognitive distortion. It's an error. And it doesn't mean it's not real or what you're experiencing is fake. It just means it's distorted, like through a lens that's cracked, okay? You can also kind of think of it as when you go to the eye doctor and they go better one, better two. Sometimes all of a sudden they throw one down and you really can't see it. So imagine it as like this blurring of reality, okay? So unfortunately, news media, television, in particular cable news outlets, package information or data in cognitive distorted ways for reasons. I mean, you know, there's the saying, if it bleeds, it leads. Human beings are skewed to pay attention to the negative, and people have figured this out. So I want to talk to you real briefly about a handful of them. Okay, so this idea of all or nothing thinking. So if you say it with a therapist, we will talk about that. If you start using language like he always or she never, if people tend to quickly become all good or all evil, if there is no middle, I am a firm believer that magic happens in the middle. My office, if I gave you a little tour, you would see all my offices are in shades of gray as a metaphor for that magic happens in the middle, that reality is actually quite nuanced. Now, we don't necessarily find that comforting sometimes because we like the absolutes sometimes. It's comforting. It's like a cognitive cheat that if you can just bucket people or things or events into two categories, good, bad. And the problem is that then things get filtered or polarized, and we see this in how information is shared with us. So that's one of the cognitive distortions that like cable news outlets use, because people are drawn to that because it's a cognitive cheat to not have to think about it.
Mind if I?
Sure, go
Hi.
ahead.
I think so. I come from a communication theory background.
Okay.
Where I go, and so I'm thinking framing theory. How it's, sometimes you're not seeing the whole picture. You're seeing just that subset, and I agree. We're getting a distorted subset of the facts.
Yes. And I'm not saying that there's evil intent and it's really just, I'm really looking at this from a behavioral science lens. And so that second one would then be catastrophizing. Now, when I'm working with clients, kind of package catastrophizing and jumping to conclusions and personalization. Those are three different cognitive distortions into one that I call movie making. Okay. So here's an example. So if you've ever been waiting for somebody and they're late and you call them and they don't answer their phone, okay? So you find yourself starting to crank up, okay? Your heart rate goes up, your pulse quickens, maybe you get a little short of breath. You start making a movie in your head that they're in a ditch on the side of 71. So by the time they walk in the door, you're like, where have you been? And they just went back to get milk and their cell phone battery died. So you have given yourself a real physiological experience based on a fiction you created in your head, okay? So because of how information is presented, it's always dramatic. It's very much a catastrophe, okay? So we lose the ability to assess possibility versus plausibility, and especially in the age of a new virus, we don't know. We're not scientists. I mean, most of us are not epidemiologists anyway. And so the catastrophizing and the movie making has really gotten to people, okay? So I hear this a lot. So it isn't just, I might get sick. It is, I'm gonna die in a hospital hallway because there are no ventilators. And it is not that those stories aren't worth telling, okay? Because these are true stories. But if you're not a governor and you don't own a ventilator company, I want to encourage you to stop consuming those stories. We know the fact now, and repeatedly exposing yourself to it is only driving fear. So that is a controllable. So a related principle would be like overgeneralization. So in a therapy office, traditionally, we might talk about like your self-concept, okay? So let's say you failed at a project and then you decide, I suck at my job, okay? Or a relationship goes sideways and you think, all women suck. And so it's taking one experience and then drawing massive conclusions. And this is definitely happening with our overexposure to numbers. So let me tell you some facts. Here are actual statistics. If you text and drive, you are 23 times more likely to get in a bad car accident. If you routinely drive 10 miles per hour over the speed limit, you are 2 times more likely to die in a car accident. And yet about 85% of people routinely don't do those two things. Right? So it's sort of counterintuitive, isn't it? Like, we know these things and we see the PSAs, but there isn't a perception of actual risk because there isn't a countdown on the upper left-hand corner of your television screen that you're being exposed to 24/7. So, I kind of imagine, and I think it's Samuelson at Hofstra did some great writings about this. 600,000 people a year die of heart disease. Can you imagine if we had a countdown on the upper left-hand corner of our television screens every time we lost somebody? I wonder what that might do to fear and then behavior change. I don't know. Well, it's happening now, and those numbers weigh heavy on my heart. I mean, I've certainly stood there and shed a tear about the grief and the loss, but the overexposure to it is really forcing people into this cognitive distorted place where actual risk and level of fear is not commensurate. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think, and kind of tying back to what you were saying before, this imminent fear is that about it and having the countdown versus texting and driving or driving over the speed limit. It's that, it's not going to happen to me perspective, but now everyone feels like this is going to happen to me.
Yes. Yes, that's a very good way of summarizing it. So it's that imminent fear versus distal fear. And because it's so right here, right? It's just right here. There is no cognitive respite. And so there's a solution for this that I have probably told people several dozen times at this point. And when they listen to me, they feel better. Okay. There does need to be, like, the news outlets did their job. Okay. They did. They created that imminent fear, the daily news brief that, we're here in Ohio, and I'm so thankful. I never thought I would say that, to be in Ohio, because spring here can be mercurial. It makes me kind of crazy. But our state leadership has done a lot of really right things that are necessary evils to make sure not everybody got sick at once. So this is not made up. This isn't about ignoring data and facts. It's about exposing yourself to it continually. So pick one or two news sources that you trust. So the CDC or like research universities, whether it's Ohio State, Johns Hopkins, pick a major healthcare system and check their news or their updates twice a day. No more than 30 minutes, like in the morning, in the afternoon. Okay. Like, you need to limit the consumption of facts because we aren't learning that much new stuff that quickly. I mean, it isn't an every 30-minute thing that you need to expose yourself to, unless this is your line of work. If there's some reason you have to be right on the front lines of every new data, I totally appreciate that. But if you don't, then limit the consumption. And if you need to read thought pieces, there are some like Medium, which is a really cool, are you familiar with Medium?
Yeah, I think it's exciting. It reminds me of, in a way, what Huffington Post was years and years ago, where it was very open and wasn't, and again, not to be political, but Huffington Post is very political now, and they their opinion. And so Medium feels like this nice hybrid of Huffington Post, early blogging days, and what we need now.
Yeah, I really like it. And they've made the coronavirus stuff publicly available. You don't have to be a member. I mean, it's really cheap. It's like $5 a year or something. And it's this open platform sort of thing, so you can see who it is, and you can very quickly do a LinkedIn search or Google them and find out if, they're a professor somewhere or they run a center, or like, it's like, okay, so this person might be seeing it through this lens, but most of the time folks are pretty like, here's the lens I'm looking through when I think about this. So if you want to read the thought pieces, I read one this morning about 7 ways the world of work is going to be different post coronavirus. And I thought it was interesting. It gave me a couple things to noodle I hadn't thought about before. So that would be action item number 1 is, because of the cognitive distortions that are utilized, you have to protect yourself. It's kind of on us. To limit that input of data. So that would be like ground zero, I think, of some of the conversations that I'm having.
Yeah, I know for me, it's important to understand what is going on, but, I have friends that are very, I think they're very much in that cycle of fear you talked about and recycling it. And I almost even, not only limiting my interactions with the news, but also limiting what kind of fear they have bringing it into my own space, because that's not how I function, and it's going to put me in a worse place than
Sure.
just kind of selectively bring only certain things in.
Yeah, I think when it's interesting because and we're on Zoom, and so the number of work interaction patterns that have shifted to these platforms, and I've had a number of people tell me, okay, I've mastered the art of the conversational pivot where we're all scared and we kind of go in this one direction, and now I'm pivoting over here, which is interesting, right? It's this new way of thinking about leadership. And so that's showing up, and people are being honest in ways around their own struggles that's new. And I don't know if it's the safety maybe of being behind a screen. I'm still thinking and pondering about that, or because we're all really scared that there is like we've kind of just ripped off the veils and are more willing to be vulnerable and honest with each other. So it's that conversation around how do we talk and share, but not go too far to derail from a productive engagement online. I think people are trying to figure that out.
Yeah, and I think it's natural for most people to have these Zoom conversations or whatever platform they're using. They're, sometimes your camera's not in the same place as the person, so then you're like looking at the camera and then or like you never feel like you're maybe looking at the right place. And for me, watching people's body language and connecting like that is so important. And even though you get some of it, you're not getting the full story. Like, I'm a hand talker, but my hands are down here. So it's fascinating. And working for a company that has been remote since its inception, I'm used to it, but I'm not. We're doing a lot more video calls too, but just the extreme, taking it further, because even, remote people who are used to it, they still want those, in-person connection. And I do think being I'm happy that video conferencing has made this essential jump to being part of the public consciousness.
Yeah, I think it's I had on my list to mention this. If you are an extrovert, there is an energy deficit that will become cumulative. Okay. So I'm a pretty classic extrovert. I get energy from being in a room with people. Sometimes it's standing in front of 200 people. My daily life, it's sitting in a room with a person, a human being, having a really sacred exchange, right? And doing it this way has had unexpected intimacies. I get to meet people's dogs. I get home tours, and I get to hear about certain things, and they show me, like they've told me a story about something and say, let me just show you, I've been talking about it for 2 years. Like I've been charmed by that. But I'm an extrovert, and so I notice like my tank gets lower.
Mm-hmm.
I will tell you, the introverts have guiltily confessed to me, and it's not that these are not feeling human beings that have great compassion for people suffering right now, but the introverts are like, I love this. they, they are like from CEOs and owners of companies who've said, oh my gosh, I've been so remote work resistant because I felt like I had to, they kind of were old school. And then I've had people give me a tour of their office and they're like, no one's here. And I'm loving it because I don't have to perform and I don't have to do that fake extroversion thing. So it's this mixed experience for introverts and extroverts. And I think it's okay to just kind of know who you are and have a safe place to kind of talk through coping mechanisms. If your energy is getting depleted, sometimes you have to opt out of 8 Zoom meetings a day, and that's okay. If you're an introvert and you know that you've got a little energy left in the tank, maybe you do then contribute in some ways that you hadn't before. I think time will tell how that one plays out.
Yeah, and I will say that I think remote working kind of shifts some of your nature in that aspect sometimes.
Mhm.
Like for me, it's been, I always thought I was a very classic extrovert. I get energy from group, meetings and that kind of thing. But I have found it's very strange having my husband and daughter in what is traditionally during the day my working space.
Oh,
And so that I'm like an introvert. Like, can I just like hide in my office all day?
oh
Um,
yeah. Oh yeah. That brings me to the idea of boundaries, which is definitely a theme. So I'm sure that it's not a novel idea to have a routine, right? A lot of people have said this, okay? Like have a routine, maintain a routine, have some sort of a schedule. But I want to explain the why on this one. I think the uncomfortableness people are experiencing, but they might not have the language for it, is boundaries. That's the reason to have a schedule, because boundaries have just they're just I it's amazing. I mean, 4 to 6 weeks ago, some of the most direct advice I would give or guidance I would give is completely irrelevant now, because boundary violations are happening all over the place. I have a friend who's a therapist in the DC area, and she and I were talking the other day that she's gone complete telehealth, and she had just remodeled her bathroom, and so it has this gorgeous like shiplap wall that my friend, we kind of gave her some feedback about, and she followed our advice, and it's gorgeous, right? And she said, well, the shiplap wall makes a great background for my therapy sessions. We were like, you're doing therapy in your bathroom?
oh
And
my gosh.
I know, right? I said, oh my gosh, Carrie, that's awful. She's like, well, the morning routine, everybody's home. The kids are home. My spouse is working from home. It's the only place I have privacy and quiet, and it can be confidential. And so that's what I do. And I mean, talk about a boundary violation, right? But a necessary evil right now. I mean, again, that we're all functioning the best we can. So if at all possible, get up, eat something, brush your teeth, change your clothes. You don't have to put on something fancy anymore, but those things symbolize a boundary. They symbolize lines when all of the lines have just become really blurry, and the folks that are doing it. So like 4 weeks ago when we initially kind of launched this, and the folks that are doing it, now this is anecdotal data just from me, but they're doing better. Like, so if you do have, and it doesn't have to be rigid, okay? Just sort of none of us can do a rigid adherence to a schedule, but something that symbolizes something ending and something beginning it will help. It really will.
I had someone share with me that it was for them, like, wearing leggings and a, comfy t-shirt, whatever. They did that. But what symbolized for them that transition from home to work was putting on shoes. Not just wearing slippers or comfy socks all day, but putting on a type of shoe. She's like, I don't wear shoes at home. So, I cleaned up a pair of shoes and those are my work shoes now.
I love it. See, you gotta find the thing that symbolizes it. I have a jacket on, but I will tell you, shoes aren't my thing. I'm wearing flip flops, so that makes me really happy, because I used to give talks standing in heels, and now I get to wear flip flops. So fine, that's awesome. So whether it's some sort of symbol of here's the line, it's a little act that can make a big difference.
Definitely. So you've talked a little bit and touched on like this idea of grief and guilt in this situation.
Mhm.
Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Oh yeah. So, grief is a big one right now. I think I had a day last week where I cried with somebody 3 times a day. And and it's funny because as people hear me speak or whatever, that I might, because I'm kind of more behavioral in my approach to things and very problem solving and action oriented, but I'm a therapist. So I feel this stuff that people are grieving, and it's like tangible things, and it is also kind of more abstract things. There are some irrevocable losses, and then there are transient losses. So here, that's some language around. I'll explain what I mean. So this anticipatory joy that we've talked about for, I don't know, a few years, it's been sort of a thing, like having something to look forward to, okay? And that having something to look forward to and then remembering the thing after is actually more impactful on your self ratings of happiness than the thing itself. So, this thing mental health people have been telling people to do, have a trip to look forward to, schedule a concert to look forward to, weddings, graduations, all the things that we hear about every day being canceled and changed. It's devastating for folks, and that's grief. That's real grief. And I think that if you frame it as not, you got to be gentle with yourself. Think of it through the stages of grief lens. Like, sort of, there's this denial at first, right? We were all kind of like, well, we'll just see what happens, or we'll maybe reschedule it. And then there is the negotiation that starts, and then there's anger, ultimately acceptance, and ultimately meaning making. There's kind of this arc we think of that we cycle through with grief. It all happened so fast that we had no time to prep for it. So it is traumatic grief. Then there's the real grief of loss. So there's death, and there's illness and worry and fear. And on top of that, like, people's everyday losses didn't stop either. So I know in my world, I'm experiencing kind of these cumulative griefs, like a marriage was ending and now you're quarantining together, cancer diagnoses, or lost children to accidents. I mean, those things were still happening. And then we have this shared cultural grief too. So taking care of yourself, finding a great therapist. A lot of us now do this. You don't have to go in to see somebody. And so finding a great therapist can be useful through this, because it's unprecedented. The grief is unprecedented. And what I'm finding is some of my trauma thrivers. So I work with, my specialty areas are around mental toughness, and I work with sexual trauma survivors. And oftentimes it's folks that are just dealing with stuff from the past, but they're really high functioning, successful people, and they have a lot of resources. And man, folks that have been through some stuff and have navigated the unexpected before do have some wisdoms to share with us. And maybe that's another conversation about navigating that. And that's probably going to come next in our collective experience. We got to kind of work through our cognitive distortions around fear first, and then move to the pragmatics of navigating the new normal. So grief is real, and it's this anticipatory grief, but I want to challenge people to not make it an irrevocable loss, meaning a permanent loss. If it isn't, some things are. Losing someone, when someone dies, that's an irrevocable loss. That's real. Most of these other losses are transient, and most folks who can leverage and pivot and navigate through that do thrive on the other side of it. You can't skip steps. It takes a while to get there, but doing some reading around grief might even be helpful to help folks with this. I mean, I know my family system is grieving the loss of, they're minor things, relatively speaking, one of a million losses, but lost sports seasons and events that were important, that we were looking forward to. So it's shared. It's millions of us all at once. Collective grief.
Yeah, and I think that that's something that people didn't realize at first, that it's true. It's grief. Like, and not only is it the loss, the not the opposite of the irrevocable loss, but even when things go on, you still should have to grieve in some ways your vision, and like that vision can, to your point, is sometimes everything for people.
Oh yeah, and absolutely. That's an excellent way of framing it. And so that abstract loss can be that it's the it isn't that it's not real. It's just, it is maybe an identity, you know, my identity as this person with this job or this role or this company. And that is a thing to lose because it was very real and it was meaning making and we were attached to it, right? Like, so if when we attach to things, the trick is to hang on but like this. So hang on tight, we attach, but not too tight.
Yeah.
That's the sweet spot. Again, that's the middle, I guess.
Only when it's serving the right purpose and not when it's causing you harm.
Yes, it's true. Easier said than done. That's for sure. Which probably gets to this idea of control, like control the controllables. Um, the you know, we were chatting briefly before about having a young child at home and trying to do control your day. So, and I mean it so sincerely with people trying to work at home with young children. If you've never done this before, I mean, and some folks have sort of flexed in and out of that in the past, and maybe you can share some wisdoms from that because I think you have. It's shocking and it's exhausting. And this task switching, and if you have ADHD, just as a little like side thing, okay? If you have ADHD, and there are a lot of really high functioning, successful people that have ADHD, the task switching that is required working from home with young children is absolutely exhausting because you have to on ramp and off ramp so much. And if you've got some ADHD, like once you get in your zone, like you're not burning the coal in the oven, like you're going. But if you're constantly task switching, it's really hard. So I guess I just, if people are out there navigating that, you're not alone. I'm certainly hearing about it. And so to manage that, it's like recalibrating the metrics you're using to evaluate productivity and success. So
Yeah,
that's necessary.
I agree. You know, as you mentioned, so my background is I've worked from home for 5 years. My daughter has, for the last 3 years, she's been in, you know, daycare full time when I'm working. But there was a while there where I was working full time and she was in daycare 20 hours. So it was, you know, 20 hours a week or so of that task switching, and I got burnt out. And then when we made the decision for her to go into daycare full time, and now she's home, and luckily I actually think she's at a weird age where it's easier but it's not easy, but at the same time we're not having to have hard discussions with her, and she misses her friends. But you know, I feel so much for, especially like high school and college seniors who are entirely missing a milestone.
Oh yeah.
And so I think for me, my biggest recommendation is to understand that nothing's gonna look like you expect it to. You can build a schedule and you can hope that you stick to it, but everything's gonna change day to day. And
Oh yeah. So I've been telling people that to have a theme for the day, like pick a general theme, pick a general set of tasks you want to accomplish within a rolling 24-hour period. I mean, some folks do like a more, you know, regimented, time driven, and that's great if that's your jam, but don't indulge like pandemic shaming either. Like that it's already a thing I'm hearing about, like, oh my gosh, this person, they've, you know, lost 8 pounds and they're working out 2 times a day, and they're like that. If that is not inspiring to you but instead is diminishing or making you feel bad, then don't consume that either. Because everybody's going to have kind of their own rhythm to how to pull
yeah,
this off.
well, that kind of, you know, one of my passion areas as a marketer is social media and how people use it. So you kind of touched on that because I do think that's one of the main ways people are staying in touch, but in an asynchronous manner. Um,
Yeah.
what are kind of your thoughts on how social media is shaping what's going on?
Oh gosh. I mean, I think I don't. The short answer to that is I have a complicated set of feelings around this because as a psychologist, I read the studies that demonstrate over and over and over again that too much consumption of social media has a negative impact on people's mental health. And I think that's a fact at this point based on the data, the research, and what people describe in my office. That being said, I love technology. I mean, it's not evil. I think that the gaming that my teenagers are able to do and talk to their friends is such a gift. And they weren't necessarily kids that did that sort of thing before. But what a beautiful thing that they're able to be connected in some way. So I have this real complicated, I'm still wrestling with it, I think. And what I would have said, I may have been more critical 6 weeks ago than I am now, because of everything that's happened and our need to become physically distant from each other. So I suppose practice social media distancing when you notice it's having an impact on your well-being or your self-concept. That's my best answer.
Yeah, I do agree. I think, from my experience and what I know, obviously just reading journals and that kind of thing, the compare and despair from social media can, really cause a detriment. And as someone, again, who believes in the power of social media to build connections, when I see it in the, when I know the evil it can cause, it's hard, but, recognizing that personal consumption has to be about what's, again, going back to what you said, is it's, don't let other people's profiles and existences negatively impact yourself. Hit on the things that are bringing you energy and life, gaming with friends, or maybe it is higher consumption rates of Netflix, and
Mm-hmm.
yeah, and that's okay, because we are filling in some voids.
Well, yeah, big voids. So that physical distancing requirement that can lead to isolation, it can be mitigated with some of these social media tools. So practice safe social media distancing based on your own well-being. Um, and so I think the distancing, there's some other strategies with distancing, like cognitive distancing, when you need to problem solve. So just to kind of offer some concluding thoughts on cognitive restructuring, which is our language for, okay, if you have a cognitive distortion, how do you then restructure it? So cognitive restructuring, what does that look like? So social media distancing as needed might be on the list, not for everybody, but for some folks it should be. So cognitive distancing, so that's a way of not being so close to your own experience and to talk about yourself in the third person when trying to figure out what to do. So I might say, all right, Melissa, this is what you need to do. Whatever it may be, a problem at work, a problem negotiating something with a company, like whatever it might be on the list, and it's going to be really individualized for people, try that. Like, so cognitive distancing is about describing the problem that you're experiencing in the third person. Temporal distancing, which means time. So one of the things that I am getting a kick out of right now and sort of indulging is imagining what my children's grandchildren might say about them. Each generation. So I shoot way in the future when I'm long gone. And I think about that because my Grammy's 98. So a child of the Depression, and like many of us who have a grandparent that was a child of the Depression, there were certain shared things, right? Like they save rubber bands and foil and reuse Ziploc bags. And, she entered a stage in her life later where this was not fiscally necessary, and they're just old habits die hard. They could make food from like water and sand. There's just this resourcefulness and this scrappiness. So I amuse myself thinking about, okay, all of these kids, there are some things that are going to be different that I hope we get to talk about moving forward. Like if they do away with testing for college exams, I'm devastated on one hand for all the students who worked so hard and went to tutors and got those test scores up. But for a lot of students, it's this, so if that's off the table, what criteria are going to be used? Could we have more diverse for a lot of different reasons? in a lot of different ways college classes in the coming years. So I think about these future things that could be upside things. And I think about all the quirky things these students might be learning. I mean, from crafting at home to special little skill sets I didn't even know. When this went down, my daughter was like, okay, I'm going to learn how to make pottery and juggle. I was like, okay. So I'm imagining that their grandchildren, whatever this generation comes to be called, will have some sort of quirky skill set. And it makes me kind of smile, and it feels a little less scary. So temporal distancing is one of the little things you can indulge to get a break.
I heard that on YouTube, one of the biggest like areas of increase has been this whole idea of like learn with me, whether that's just like people learning their homework together, or an actual skill. Like that's the like biggest increase they're seeing, and it's fascinating, and not to say that you have to learn a new skill during this time, because there are plenty of people who just don't have the energy at the end of the day, but it is, what people are choosing to focus on when maybe they do have time is amazing.
I think it could be interesting to see how it plays out over the course of this generation's aging into the workplace and whatnot. So, I think that the first 30 days of this was all about fear and trying to manage cognitive distortions, media consumption. I think that the accepting a routine as a way of demonstrating boundaries can be helpful. I do believe giving yourself permission to reset your metrics for how to evaluate productivity. You may need to look at that and recalibrate those metrics and look for new efficiencies. That definitely is in our future, I think. A final thought would be when you're noticing you're spiraling to one of my cognitive restructuring strategies I give people is op-ed versus investigative journalism. So people tend to op-ed themselves. They use adjectives. They use feeling words. They tend to, kind of go down this path of a lot of emotion-based stuff. But when I ask them, okay, I want you to do an investigative journalism, old school style. He stated, she stated, this event happened, like really boring, just state the facts. If you challenge yourself to do like, okay, I'm op-editing this, what does an investigative journalism approach look like? And I will I'll put like some of these thoughts on my website, or I can share them with you, and I'll write out my investigative journalism questions that I give people. It can be useful, especially if you're not accurately assessing risk and having a proportional fear response. It can be really helpful over time.
Yeah, that's amazing. I love that idea of opinion versus op-ed, or op-ed versus investigative journalism. You spoke to my journalistic heart. Well, thank you so much. I think we could probably keep talking all day long, but want to be respectful of your time. I know you've been incredibly busy during this. Can you share where people can find and get a hold of you?
Oh, sure. So I'm in Columbus, Ohio, and my website is behaveforward.com. And it sort of, I guess, speaks to the importance I place on behavior as human currency. That's kind of all we got. It's the way we transact with each other. So behaveforward.com. And I have recently brought someone on board who's wonderful, and hired someone else the day that the governor shut down the state of Ohio. But she can do telehealth sessions too. So I have some folks who are really wonderful and have specialties in anxiety and depression and can do it this way. So if you find that it could be useful to have an accountability partner in this, then give us a call.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Melissa. This has been amazing.